Everyone. You're all very welcome to today's Doctoral College, University of Limerick Doctoral College webinar. Today we're looking at an issue called managing financially throughout your PhD. Now, the rationale or the reason, I'm no financial expert, but what I'm seeking to bring here is just my own experience of doing the PhD and just some advice or some guidance, hopefully, for you with regard to how to cope with financial matters, that very tricky financial matters sometimes when you're doing a PhD. So the rationale, I suppose, for today's webinar was ultimately when we asked you in the summer for your guidance with regard to what kind of topics, what kind of new topics we could cover in this webinar series. One of the things which stood out really was about coping financially while doing your PhD. So that's where the rationale for today's webinar came from, and hopefully it will provide you with some enlightenment, hopefully, and some insight, and maybe some tips and advice on how to deal with matters financial while doing a PhD. So I'm just going to roll on with the slides here, and I'm just going to talk about something called budgeting. So throughout this webinar, we're just going to look at a number of various aspects of managing financially, while doing a PhD. So if any of you have any kind of expertise or any kind of insights into matters financial, and you probably have a lot more expertise than me, please feel free to interrupt and to correct anything which may be, erroneous or misleading in that regard. So I'm just going to start with budgeting and how budgeting itself is so crucial to you, because for everyone doing a PhD, it's almost inevitable that you're going to have a limited amount of finances. Your budget is going to be curtailed by the fact that, your stipend, no matter how prestigious it may be, is not really going to be enough to get you through, a full year without having to rely on other sources of finance. So I think the most generous stipends that we're going to see in Ireland from the start of 2025 is €25,000, and again, that's going to be difficult to maintain a lifestyle, without resorting to other kinds of sources of finance. So even at the highest level, when we're talking about the best kinds of stipends, it's still going to be difficult for PhD candidates to exist on that amount of money. So it's almost inevitable that some form of budgeting and some form of financial management is going to be required for you while you're doing your PhD, because resources, if you like, will be scarce, and it's how you allocate those resources is going to have is going to determine, if you like, how successful your financial planning is going to be. So budgeting, I would say, is really crucial because that helps you to manage your finances effectively, and that ensures that you can, if you like, that you can cover most, or at least those necessary expenses, without causing without causing yourself any undue financial stress. And another really important aspect of a well thought out or well planned budget is that it does help you to avoid unnecessary debt, which is the thing you really want to avoid when you're doing a PhD. Some debt will be absolutely necessary, but what you want to avoid at all costs is unnecessary debt. So I'll just try and give you some advice here about creating and sticking to a budget. And again, if any of you have any tips or guidance or insights in this regard, then please feel free to interrupt and to provide those tips and guidance or insight as we go along. So first of all, I think what's really good is just to kind of keep track of your expenses. So it's always good to keep a detailed record of your income and expenses. And I'll just give you some instances or some ideas of how to do this, or just apps that you can use for this particular purpose, because this by keeping track of your expenses, this helps you identify areas where you can cut costs if you need to cut costs. Obviously, it's always good, no matter, if you're a PhD candidate or if you're, a household with a large amount of discretionary expenditure, it's always good to prioritize needs over wants. So it's always good, to focus on, think of what your essentials items are, like your rent, like your bills, like groceries, your phone, for example, and then to perhaps, if you do need to constrain your spending, to limit spending on non-essential items. So about creating a budget. So how do you go about creating a budget? And I suppose so many of us have different ways of doing this, but it's always good, if you like, to try and track your income and expenses. So to look at all kinds of, to look first of all, what's your income? So it could be your stipend or your scholarship or part-time work. And it's always good to track that and to see, what are the sources of income that you have? What is money coming in? Then it's good to look at expenses. I think it's good to look at expenses in two different categories. One, if you like, is fixed. That's to do with rent and your bills. And then variable. And this could be, expenses that vary throughout the course of the academic year, like food, phone, and entertainment. But all of these are, I would see all of these, as necessary expenditure, but I just think it helps to put them into fixed and variable. And those of you who might say, well, entertainment isn't a necessary expenditure, but I think it's really good in terms of your mental health and your sanity, to have some to have an outlet in which you can, enjoy life also. So set your financial goals. So obviously, it's good also to think of your financial goals as maybe, your short-term financial goals in terms of your monthly savings, and perhaps then your long-term goals as perhaps a kind of an emergency fund or a rainy day fund. Again, when you're talking about allocation, I mentioned there just about allocating resources, but it's always good to allocate funds to various, to your priority expenses. So prioritize, essential expenses, savings, and discretionary spending. I would say it's always good to review and to adjust your spending just to see, if you need to stay on track with your spending or to adjust it as it's needed. And in terms of when you are budgeting and, in terms of how to save money, and again, this can be, a very, very fraught area. One of the things I would say is just to do lots of meal prepping, to do amount of batch cooking in advance. But more practically, I would say use things like, there are a lot of student discounts available and I'm going to give you a website which shows you all the kinds of areas in which you can use a student discount in Ireland. And I know we always think of you as, researchers and PhD candidates, but you are, for the purposes of this, you are, when it comes to availing of discounts, I would say certainly use your student discount as much and as often as possible. Finding affordable housing, now this is obviously, very, very difficult in the current climate in Ireland to find any kind of affordable housing, but it always, sometimes, and affordable housing can be found more by word of mouth than by looking at websites, because on websites you're not really going to see many areas where there are affordable housing options available. But the accommodation office here at the university also has a lot of options when it comes to affordable housing, and obviously using public transport is, another tip for saving money. But again, it's easy for me to say all these things, but for you who are living the day-to-day existence of a PhD candidate, these things sometimes are more fraught and more difficult to do they're more difficult to do than just saying them in a webinar like this. Okay. Now, there are certain financial planning tools which are really good. The first one, which I'll give you, is this thing called savvyspender.ie. So there are links to all of these. I've put links, so I'll send you all of the slides afterwards. But savvyspender.ie, that's a really good website because it shows you the areas in which you can avail of a student discount in Ireland. And there are numerous areas in which you can do so. And it gives you, good insights into the kinds of discounts that you may be we're not aware of all of these particular discounts, but it's a good website and it should give you some tips and some guidance on how you can save a certain amount of money by availing of a student discount. There are also a lot of budgeting apps which are actually really good in terms of helping you to budget and which are really good in terms of keeping track of expenditure. I've put links to them in here also. One of them is called Mint, and the other one here that I've put, because I think these are the two best of the budgeting tools that I saw when researching for this webinar. The other one I saw was something called YNAB, which is called You Need a Budget. And in fact, I think this is the best one of them all. And this is actually free to college students for 1 year. So again, I don't like to call you students, but certainly you should avail of a discount like this or an offer like this, where it's free for university going PhD and research master's candidates such as yourselves to use for 1 year. So I would say certainly use an app such as You Need a Budget, because that's actually a really good app, and it's very, very good in terms of, from what I could see anyway, in terms of helping people to divide out their spending, into necessary and discretionary spending and into long-term spending, short-term. And it's just really good. It's just very good to keep track of your spending and where you should be allocating your money. So that's a good way of looking at, at how to budget an app such as this. You Need a Budget. And as I say, it's free to use for 1 year, and it's actually, from what I saw of it anyway, in action, it's a really, really good tool to use. Obviously, we'd always say to seek scholarships and funding, and I realize that some of you won't have, been lucky enough to get a scholarship or say a scholarship, one of the, Research Ireland or Tide to Earn scholarships, which are, very, very prestigious, but very difficult to gain. But hopefully you'll all have some type of funding which will allow you at least, to continue on as a PhD candidate. But it's always good. It's even if it's only for 12 months, it's always good to look for scholarships, for funding and for fellowships which are specific to your field of study. Now, I always say to people that the second application you make will be the easiest one you ever have to do, because once you've done all the work for filing one application, really, and maybe if you've not been successful first time around, you can take the feedback from that first application and use it in your second one. And the amount of work and background work that you have to do second time round will be nowhere near as onerous on you as the first time of applying for a stipend or a scholarship. So the more applications you submit, I would say, the better your chances of receiving funding. Obviously, and again, I did my PhD a long time ago, so I've been a full-time work for a long time. So the environment, that whole environment has changed since I was a PhD candidate myself many, many years ago. But one of the things that has changed is that there's a great deal of part-time work available, but sometimes that is not attractive to cohorts of people because, it can interfere with the amount of work that you have to do with your own research. But there is quite a lot of part-time work available and some part-time work available on campus, but you can also look for assistantships within UL also, or for teaching hours also, which can provide, valuable experience. Something which a lot of PhD people a lot of PhD researchers don't think of. But a colleague and a friend of mine did this when he was doing his PhD, was that he did some consulting or freelancing in his area of expertise. And so this friend of mine wrote a number of reports for, I think it was for a non-governmental organization, but it was a very, very useful source of additional income, and it was related also to his research. So it can also be, a good way of advancing your research as well. So, think of what your expertise is and see and consider whether you have the skills and the time, obviously, to offer consulting or freelance services could be to companies in the area, or it could be to people on in cyberspace. Just think of opportunities for you to advance your own research skills by putting yourself forward as a consultant or somebody who can do freelancing work in your own area of expertise. And you may find that this is a really, really valuable way of advancing your research, but also of gaining really, really important experience. What I would always say to people, and I think it stands to reason, and I think this is the advice that anybody would give you as a PhD candidate, is to try at all costs to avoid what might be debt. One of the things, obviously, the most, if you like, the most obvious means of incurring high interest debt, is through use of your credit card. So I would say, if you are in a situation where you're paying, a high rate of interest on your credit card, to use that credit card sparingly and to try as much as possible to pay off the balance in full each month to avoid high interest charges. So credit card is very attractive, obviously, to use, but if you don't pay off the balance fully each month, the high interest charges can be very, very punitive indeed. And there are other options now, just in terms of debit cards and the likes of Revolut, but credit cards can really, really have a terrible impact on somebody who's endeavoring to save or to avoid, high interest debt. Also, be cautious with personal loans and only use them if necessary, because again, loans may look very, very attractive, but you can be saddled with quite a lot of debt. And I talk about different options that you have here in Ireland with regard to postgraduate loans. But again, I would caution, against using them unless you absolutely have to. One of the ways, or one of the pieces of advice which I saw in quite an amount of the literature about, managing financially throughout your PhD, a lot of the advice said, to build an emergency fund, to try to save regularly. And again, this can be very difficult to do when you're endeavoring to undertake a PhD and to engage in, research with a small amount of money. But if you can at all, it's always good to set aside a small amount of money each month for what might call a rainy day fund or an emergency fund, and this can help you to cover unexpected expenditure without incurring further debt. One of the other ways that could be useful is, again, to use a high yield savings account. Now, there aren't very many of these available, but it's always good exploring options and to see what might be the rate of the highest yielding savings account, and look and avail of certainly your status, because when you're looking to financial institutions, they think of you as students. So think of ways in which you can use, your student status to gain, advantages in terms of, high yield savings account, or say if you do need to avail of a personal loan, look at the amount that's been offered to postgraduates. I'm just going to talk about that in a moment or two. Also, I would say, in terms of something which I guess a lot of us don't have really is financial literacy. Because, sometimes when you're doing a PhD, it can be quite a shock. The fact that you have to be a budget, you have to be a financial planner, and you have to undertake, a certain amount of budget planning. And that can be something of, that can be somewhat arresting and something of somewhat intimidating for some of us. But it's always good to look at, ways in which you can advance and improve your whole financial literacy in order to manage your money more effectively to prevent unnecessary debt. So there are resources here within the institution, within UL, and online, which can help you, to improve your awareness of financial management. And it's always good to attend any kind of workshops and seminars on budgeting, saving, and investing. You'll see these advertised usually somewhere like UL Connect or on a site such as LinkedIn, where you'll see maybe some insights and guidance that you can gain by attending these kinds of seminars and workshops. I would say also use the university's resources. So if you go to the page here, Financial Supports at UL, it gives you all the kinds of support and emergency funding that you can try to avail of here within the university itself, and avail of discounts on things like, within the university here, but also on materials that you need to conduct your research. So make sure to avail of the discounts that are available on software, on books, on transportation, and on other essentials that you need to conduct your research. And just in terms of funding and scholarships, I'm just going to give a list here of a lot of the kinds of scholarships that are available, that are open to postgraduate researchers here within UL, but also throughout Ireland. And these are some of the, if you like, the more high-profile funding and scholarship opportunities that are available. But I would always say, even if you're in your second year of your PhD, your third year, just to think of applying to some of these, because it's always possible to get funding, even if it's for the last year of your PhD. For example, the government of Ireland postgraduate scholarship scheme, the winners of those awards for the current academic year were recently announced, and it's very telling, very interesting that, say, of those who gained scholarships here at the University of Limerick, some of their scholarships last for 4 years, and some others have it for 12 months. So think of what stage you are in your PhD, and don't despair of getting some kind of funding or some kind of stipend or scholarship, no matter how late you are into your, how advanced you are in your PhD. Another external source of funding for postgraduates are what we call the SUSI grants. And again, there are certain restrictions with these with regard to, who can avail of them, but they can be really helpful to, PhD candidates such as yourselves in terms of maintenance grants. You can get a maintenance grant to help with living costs, and it's paid directly into your bank account. Or, for example, I think the maintenance grants themselves depend also on, for example, I think the maintenance grants the amount you get paid depends on where you're living. So if your address is 30 kilometers away from the university, your maintenance grant is much higher than it would be if you're living within a 30-kilometer radius of the university. And also but these are really useful grants because they help with, with your living costs. But also, there are also what are called fee grants that are given, by SUSI, and these cover tuition, for those who are maybe, don't avail of the free fees scheme, including the student contribution. And they give you also money for essential field trips, which can be, really useful for you if you're conducting research in the field, or if you're conducting data collection or something akin to that. So I said I mentioned some of the student loans that are available, and as I said, I would urge caution with regard to personal loans, but again, it's up to everybody. I wouldn't dictate to people to never take out a personal loan, but I would caution against, particularly, somewhat high rates of interest. So I'll just give you some two examples here of two banks that offer student loans, and some of the caveats that I think should apply when you're looking at what are seemingly attractive options. There are, there are undergraduate loans, but also postgraduate loans, which are tailored, for postgraduate students and for people on taught programs, and people such as yourselves on research masters or PhD or professional doctorate programs. And you can get, they can be offered a loan of, I think it's up to €10,000 by the Bank of Ireland. Again, I'll check this later again on the website, but when I looked, that was the information I had. There was up to €10,000 for postgraduates. And then there are, these rates of interest, which look, the what is it called? The annual performance rate. The annual rate of interest was at 5.6% for postgraduates. So that doesn't look like a very onerous amount, but if you look at how the rate of inflation is coming down again to be almost to be very low again this year, that kind of interest rate is maybe not so attractive. And it's always good to look at the calculators that the bank offers and to see how much interest you would ultimately have to pay over the lifetime of a loan. Usually you'll get something like a repayment term which will allow you to pay it over between 1 to 5 years. And as I said, it's always good to go into the bank's website and to go onto the calculator and to see how much interest you would ultimately pay, because it can end up, the amount of interest you have to pay can end up being a lot more than you think you will have to pay when you are taking out one of these loans, which may look very attractive initially, but could tie you into a certain amount of debt that is much more than you are capable of dealing with. And also, and it looks very attractive when you see something like, that postgraduates can defer repayments for up to 12 months. So you think, oh, wow, that looks very, very attractive indeed. But again, I'll just show you just a little caveat with that just in a moment. I'll talk now about the AIB and what their kind of loans are. So they offer what are called Student Plus account loans. So they're available for PGRs if you have what's called a Student Plus account. I'm not aware of the intricacies of the Student Plus account, but maybe some of you hold such an account and can enlighten us further. And they offer, loan amounts available between €600 and up to €50,000. Although, when you try and calculate on their website, I was trying to calculate for 50,000, and I think it would only allow me to look at 30,000 maximum. And when I went in and I into their calculator and I imitated being a PhD candidate, but I think 30,000 was what they what it said was the maximum that could be borrowed. But their headline figure anyway is 50,000, but it might be good to check that out. And again, they have interest rates or variable interest rates, and again, the annual percentage rate is quite high and higher than in the Bank of Ireland. But again, they're offering you more money perhaps, but again, it's as well for you to investigate these further and to drill down into the detail of these to see and to calculate online how much you would ultimately have to pay. Now, I would say some of the points you have to consider with interest rates. So if you have a variable rate of interest, This means your repayments, they can change over time, and this can affect your total repayment amount. So again, look at that. Look at something like, a variable rate, because it can go up or down. And given the inflationary spike that we had, say post-COVID, and after Russia invaded Ukraine, and the spike in energy and oil prices, particularly with gas prices and oil prices, that resulted in that, and the inflationary spiral that came as a result of that. That meant a lot of people who had a variable rate of interest then found that their repayments had increased quite significantly. So again, if variable rates, they look very attractive, but it's always good to think of that there may be something what might call an exogenous shock to the global economy, which can cause those interest rates to increase. Now, this is what I said. I mentioned earlier about PGRs will have, in some cases, 12 months they give you to defer payments. So some loans that offer this, they look very, very attractive. But what you have to look out for here is the higher interest rates, higher overall interest rates that may accrue as a result. So I think that's really important for you to consider also. Really crucial. It looks very attractive. You're told you can defer your repayments for 12 months. But think about if I defer my repayments for 12 months, that will give me a lot of cash flow at the moment, a lot of discretionary spending. But then in the years when you have to repay the money, years 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, for example, the interest rates that you are saddled with can be very, very high indeed. And also just make sure that you meet the eligibility criteria for some of these loans if you're thinking of them, that you're a full-time PGR, and that you have what might be called a suitable co-borrower if required, or that you have someone, that you have a parent or a relative who is able to vouch for the fact that you will be repaying the loan on your ultimately to the bank. Okay, so I'm just going to finish with a number of small pointers here, and this is just for situations in which you're dealing with trying to deal with unexpected expenses, because always in a PhD you will find situations in which you have to deal with unexpected expenditure. So just trying to give you some pointers along the way. And again, these probably are relevant for people, not just who are doing a PhD, but for large swathes of the general population. But anyway, I'll just try and show you just some of these and just see what you think about them. And again, if you have any comments or anything you'd like to say, please either, unmute your microphone and intervene, or please put it in the chat and we can discuss it, once we stop recording the webinar. Okay, so first of all, there's just about 5 points to make here. First of all, as before, so I'm just reinforcing some of the points made before here. One, build an emergency fund. Aim to save a small amount of money each month specifically for emergencies, because there always will be some emergency, some spike in expenditure that will happen throughout your PhD. And just have, if you like, or try, and again, this is easy for me to say, but, for those of you who maybe, are struggling financially, while doing it, and a lot of people struggle financially while doing a PhD, but if you can in any way to keep, some fund available that will allow you, to have access to that fund. So just think of it as an emergency fund that will allow you to have access to it when you do have those rainy days or those unexpected expenditures that we all deal with from time to time. And ideally, aim to save 3 to 6 months worth of living expenses. Now, again, that might be a very, very unrealistic goal, but if it is possible, it's always worth thinking of just having a cushion, if you like, of, I'll call it a cushion, but just have a certain amount of money available as emergency expenditure for those things that arise unexpectedly along the way while you're undertaking a PhD. What we always have to do, no matter those of us who are the most diligent in following our financial goals, but what's always necessary is you'll need at some point to adjust your budget, because there will be there will be expenditure that you are not expecting along the way. So it may be necessary sometimes, when you're dealing with unexpected expenditure, you will have to adjust your budget. So think about things like non-essential expenditure, maybe like dining out, or I know I said entertainment is a necessity, but maybe of the necessities you could call it the least important of the necessities, if you like. Although I do see it as very, very important. I do see it as, as something that is crucial to our sanity. But try to, if you can, to think of, well, what's a non-essential expenditure this month? Maybe reallocate funds from that to deal with unexpected expenditure elsewhere. That can be really difficult to do, because you may have planned to go to a concert or to dine out, and then it's really difficult to have to change your or to reallocate the money that you were going to spend on that to dealing with an unexpected expenditure. And I would just say to review and revise and regularly review your budget to identify areas where you can cut back if it's needed. And again, this is something which none of us like to do, and hopefully we'll not have to do this too often throughout the course of the PhD. I mentioned earlier just financial tools which can help you with regard to tracking your expenditure. So again, just to reinforce the point about MINT or YNAB, which is You Need a Budget. YNAB, I would say, it's very, very good in terms of helping you to just identify particular areas where you can save. It's a really, really good tool. And again, as I said, it's free for 1 year for people who are registered as university students. And just again, this is just self-explanatory, really, just about trying to track your expenses. Keep a close eye on your expenses to spot any areas where you might be overspending. That's why having an app like YNAB can be very, very good, because it can alert you to certain areas where you are overspending. And if any of you are using an app like this, I'd be very curious to hear about how you're getting on with it. Again, part-time work is another possibility, or freelance work to boost your income, or putting yourself forward as a consultant in your area of expertise. And if I come across, a lot of, say, in stores like Shesh, where you find a lot of second-hand items such as, phones and whatever it may be, a lot of electronic gadgets, headphones and things like that. But if you have items that you no longer need, you may find that there's a market for them. And a store, I have to be so careful in how I pronounce this, Shesh, is very good in terms of giving you a good deal on items that you no longer use. So if you have, for example, a phone that you no longer use, you can either trade it in there, or they will give you credit, or they will give you a certain amount of money for a particular item, and that can be a good way of disposing of items that you no longer use and that are no longer necessary for you. Again, just the last point I'd make is just to try and anticipate certain costs. So there will be unexpected, and again, this sounds like a contradiction, what I've said here. Some unexpected expenditure um, can to some degree be anticipated. I know that sounds like almost like a paradox, but there is some expenditure. For example, I know almost inevitably that I will have some medical bills throughout the year. But I can't say when that's going to be. But it's almost inevitable that you will have medical bills. If you have a car, for example, again, it's almost inevitable that you will have some expenses with regard to running the car. Like when it comes to car repairs, there's going to be something to do with maintenance or whatever it may be. But we don't know when those expenditures are going to occur. So it's always good to set aside, a certain amount of money for these and other potential costs. So that's why things like, having an emergency fund, having an amount of funding for those kinds of expenditures that are, if you like, unexpected but inevitable, is always good. So I'll just finish there. I hope I've given you some insight. Oh yes, just about insurance, because I know if you're an international if you are an international PhD candidate, you're going to have a certain high amount of insurance costs. So just to make sure, that if you are not an international PhD candidate, make sure also that you have adequate insurance coverage to mitigate large unexpected expenditure that might come your way. So that again, that may seem like a very onerous amount of expenditure to be engaged in. For example, like insurance. None of us likes, the idea of paying out, for private health insurance, for example, can be very, very expensive in Ireland. Car insurance, extremely expensive. None of us like to engage in those kind of things. But they are, well, certainly when it comes to, say, car insurance, you probably give no option. But if you have a car, you have to have car insurance. And obviously, when it comes to issues around health, a lot of people don't have private health insurance. And again, it's not necessary to have that. You can go through the public system, but it does mean, you usually have, because of our two-tier health system, that you do have longer waits and you don't get the same level of treatment as somebody as somebody with private insurance. But if you are thinking about insurance and you're an international PhD candidate, you've no option but to have that. But if you're not an international PhD candidate, just think about, how much insurance you're going to spend on things like a car, and look around and see what the options are. There may be a way of reducing expenditure in areas like that. So I'm going to finish there. As I said, I'm certainly not an expert on finances or on financial management, but I do hope that these areas that were covered in this webinar will give you some kind of advice or some kind of guidance, or just maybe some tips with regard to how to deal with expenditure as a PhD candidate. It's one of the areas, we always talk about the importance of funding for PhD candidates, and how, it's so difficult to be a self-funded PhD researcher. But hopefully, for those of you who are experiencing any kind of financial difficulties, that you will be able to get some kind of respite from those through the financial supports that are available within the university or from other sources. So I'm going to stop this. I'm going to stop this webinar now, and I'll just see if any of you just want to intervene or to ask a comment. Sorry, to make a comment, or perhaps to contribute your own experience of dealing with finances, or just if you have some advice for somebody, to please either put it in the chat or we can discuss it now. So I'm just going to stop the webinar now, but we can continue with our own discussion after this. And I'll just say, for those who are watching, this afterwards online, just thanks for your time and for your attention, and see you soon.